Why should you be Pennsylvania's next senator?
You know what? This is as simple as it is complex. We have to answer a question of who do we think government should work for. And I've said pretty consistently, I think it should work for working people. It should work for working families. And that means making the basic bargain accessible to every single family. This idea that you can have one good job backed up by a union, or if you want to start a small business, that there's an environment for you to do so, that your kids can go to a good school no matter which part of the Commonwealth that they're in, that, you know what, if you or them get sick along the way, that you're actually able to go to a doctor and be able to fill the prescription when you leave, and then finally that you can retire with a level of dignity in that house you were able to afford in the first place in a neighborhood that's safe and clean. I know that that has been out of reach for so many families because it was out of reach for my family. And so if we're going to deliver a government that works for working families, I think it starts with having a working person as our next United States Senator.
Only about 30% of Americans say that they think the country is going in the right direction, and Democrats are in charge right now. So what does that tell you?
It tells me that the Senate is deeply broken.
So whose fault is that? Is that the fault of some moderate Democrats who have not voted the way other Democrats have wanted them to? Is it the fault of the larger Democratic caucus for not being able to convince them? Is it President Biden's fault?
You know what? There's been a Joe who is at fault, and his name is Joe Manchin, and Kristen Sinema, who have been completely resistant to doing what is supported by most of the American people, what is supported by most of the Democratic caucus, and what has been the president's agenda, which he was elected to get moving on. We need to flip this seat because the Republicans have not been focused on any of these things.
What would you do, and would you want your colleagues do, to address inflation?
You know, as I've said, there's a lot in our economy that we ought to be proud of, and it's because of the president's leadership. You know, I mentioned record low
prices are high.
And you know what? They are way too high. I know it. I was just at the grocery store. I'm feeling it. And it's why I've been saying we need to do things like make the child tax credit permanent, because that was extra money in people's pockets.
Do you worry that you could be making things worse by sending out more money?
I worry that there is a contingent of people who think that cutting child poverty in half is not a noble thing that we ought to do. We ought to get that number to zero so no kid in Pennsylvania or anywhere else in the country has to spend a night hungry.
Do you think that police departments should be getting more money, in particular from the federal government, to fight gun violence?
You know, so the tragedy of this is that, you know, we're not far from my house, and I can go home tonight and have more people murdered on my block. And so there is no issue that's probably more personal to me than the fact that we have, you know, 500 plus people murdered last year, and that has not seemed to subside in a real way.
Just to
be clear, no, I don't want to defund
this.
the police. I've been clear and consistent on this, that my approach to this is not to defund the police.
If you are elected, you would be Pennsylvania's first black senator.
I've heard that.
You would also be Pennsylvania's first openly LGBTQ senator.
Yep.
And I've seen you tweeting some Vote Malcolm, Make History tweets.
That sounds like a good idea.
Why do you think that is important in this race?
If we're going to have a government that is able to fulfill the fullness of the American promise, we have to have a government that reflects the fullness of the American experience. And yeah, it's not lost on me that I will be the first African American to ever represent Pennsylvania in the U.S. Senate. In communities like mine, we feel it first and worst when government doesn't work in a way that prioritizes the needs of working families. Not only are we going to make history, but we're going to go and make a difference for working people who desperately need a senator who's not just asking for their vote, but who understands their lives.